dass der so schnell frei. Unfall. Unfall.
The rain came down in sheets that Thursday night, drumming against the windows of the Blue Anchor diner like restless fingers. Neon signs from across the street painted the wet glass in shades of blue and pink, casting shifting shadows across the worn linoleum floor. It was the kind of November evening in Brooklyn that made people walk faster, heads down, collars up, the kind that kept the diner warm with the smell of coffee and the low murmur of conversations that didn't want to be heard too clearly. Emily Rivers pushed a strand of dark hair behind her ear and glanced at the clock above the kitchen pass. 9:47 p.m. Another hour and 13 minutes until closing. Her feet ached in her sneakers, and the muscles in her lower back had started that familiar burn that came from 6 hours of carrying trays and forcing smiles. She'd been working at the Blue Anchor for 8 months now, long enough to know every crack in the counter, every customer who ordered decaf but meant regular, every shadow that didn't quite belong. "Table 7 needs a refill," called Marcus from behind the grill, his dark eyes meeting hers with the kind of understanding that came from both working the late shift. "And Jerry at the counter wants as usual." Emily nodded, reaching for the coffee pot. The diner wasn't crowded tonight. The weather had kept most people home. A couple sat in booth 3, speaking in hushed tones over untouched burgers. Jerry, a regular who drove a taxi and always ordered apple pie with vanilla ice cream, sat at his usual spot reading yesterday's newspaper. An older woman occupied booth 5, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea as she stared out at the rain. Normal, quiet, safe. Emily had learned to appreciate quiet nights. They were predictable, manageable. She poured Jerry's coffee with practiced ease, offered him a genuine smile. He was kind, always tipped well, never asked questions, and returned to her station near the kitchen. That's when the bell above the door chimed. 4 men entered, and Emily felt the temperature in the room shift. It wasn't anything she could name exactly, just an instinct that had kept her alive for the past 3 years. The kind of awareness you develop when you've spent time looking over your shoulder, when you've learned that survival sometimes depends on noticing what others miss. The first man through the door was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Emily made in 2 months. His dark hair was slicked back, and his eyes, even from across the room, carried the weight of someone who was used to being obeyed without question. He moved with the kind of confidence that came from power, the kind that made other people step aside without thinking about why. Behind him came 3 others, each dressed similarly, each carrying themselves with that same quiet authority. They weren't loud or aggressive. They didn't need to be. Their presence alone commanded attention. Marcus caught Emily's eye from the kitchen window, his expression tight. He'd noticed too. The tall man scanned the diner with a practiced gaze, taking in every face, every exit, every potential problem. His eyes lingered on Emily for just a fraction of a second before he moved toward the corner booth, the one with a clear view of the door and the street outside. His companions followed, arranging themselves with careful precision. 2 sat facing the entrance. 1 kept his back to the wall. Emily took a breath, grabbed 4 menus, and approached the table. Her heart beat a little faster, but she kept her expression neutral, professional. She'd learned long ago how to hide fear behind a practiced smile. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said, her voice steady. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" The 3 men ordered without much interest. Coffee, water, 1 asked for a Coke. But the tall man, the one who sat at the center of the booth like a king at his court, looked directly at Emily. His eyes were a striking shade of gray-blue, intelligent and calculating. "Coffee. Black," he said. His voice was deep, controlled, the kind that suggested he rarely had to repeat himself. Emily nodded, writing it down, even though she'd remember. "I'll be right back with those." As she turned away, she heard one of the men murmur something in Italian. Another laughed. Low, brief. The tall man said nothing. Emily's hands were steady as she poured the drinks, but her mind was racing. She'd seen men like this before. 3 years ago, in another city, another life. Men who wore expensive suits and carried themselves like the world bent around them instead of the other way around. Men who operated in the spaces between legal and illegal, who made the rules instead of following them. She delivered the drinks, took their orders, steaks, pasta, nothing complicated, and returned to the kitchen to hand Marcus the ticket. "You know who that is?" Marcus asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily shook her head, though something in her chest tightened. Marcus leaned closer, Adrian Moretti. You don't watch the news? The name meant nothing to Emily, but the way Marcus said it, with a mixture of fear and respect, told her everything she needed to know. He's connected, Marcus continued, glancing toward the booth. Real connected, the kind of connected where people don't ask questions. Emily's throat felt dry. Why would someone like that come here? Marcus shrugged. Who knows? Maybe he likes the coffee. Maybe he's meeting someone. Either way, we serve him, we smile, we don't get involved. Emily nodded, but a cold feeling had settled in her stomach. She'd spent 3 years trying to stay invisible, trying to build a life where people like Adrian Moretti didn't exist. And now one was sitting in her section, drinking coffee like it was the most normal thing in the world. The next 20 minutes passed in tense normalcy. Emily served other tables, refilled coffee cups, cleared dishes. The couple in booth 3 paid and left. The older woman asked for her check. Jerry finished his pie and waved goodbye on his way out. The diner grew quieter, emptier. Emily was wiping down the counter when she heard the footsteps behind her. Heavy, deliberate. She turned to find a man standing near the kitchen entrance, partially hidden by the wall. He wasn't one of the 4 at the booth. He wore a dark jacket, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, and his eyes kept darting toward Adrian Moretti's table. He pulled out his phone, spoke in a low, urgent whisper. Yeah, he's here. Corner booth. 4 total. No one else. 20 minutes. Got it. Emily's blood went cold. The man ended the call and slipped out the side door that led to the alley. Emily stood frozen, her mind processing what she'd just heard. The tone of that conversation, the urgency, the way the man had been watching Adrian's table. She'd heard conversations like that before, 3 years ago, right before everything fell apart. Her heart hammered in her chest. This wasn't her problem. It couldn't be her problem. She'd walked away from that world, changed her name, moved across the country. She served coffee and cleared tables and kept her head down. That was the deal she'd made with herself, survive by being invisible. But as she glanced toward the front windows, she saw them. 2 men standing across the street, partially obscured by the rain and the shadows between streetlights. They weren't moving. They were waiting. One kept checking his watch. The other's hand rested inside his jacket. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She looked back at Adrian Moretti's table. The 4 men were talking casually, finishing their meals. They had no idea. How could they? They felt safe here, in this quiet diner in this working-class neighborhood. Emily's mind raced through possibilities, through consequences. If she said nothing, if she just kept serving coffee and clearing tables, whatever was about to happen would happen. People would get hurt. Maybe they deserved it. She didn't know their lives, their choices. Maybe this was justice in some form she couldn't understand. Or maybe it was just more loss, more endings. Her hands trembled as she reached for the order pad. She thought about her brother, Danny. She thought about the night she'd tried to warn him and how he hadn't listened. She thought about the funeral she'd watched from a distance, unable to approach, unable to say goodbye because the same people who'd taken him were looking for her too. She thought about the last 3 years of looking over her shoulder, of changing her name, of being afraid, and she made a decision. Emily walked to the booth with their check, her face calm despite the storm raging inside her chest. She placed the small slip of paper on the table, right in front of Adrian Moretti. "Whenever you're ready, sir," she said quietly. No rush. Adrian reached for the check without looking up, still engaged in conversation with one of his companions. But as his fingers touched the paper, Emily saw his expression change. It was subtle, a slight narrowing of his eyes, a pause in his movements. The check showed the itemized list of their orders: 4 coffees, 3 steaks, 1 pasta, the subtotal, tax, everything calculated correctly. But in the bottom right corner, written in Emily's hurried handwriting, was another number: 4 outside 20men. Adrian's eyes lifted slowly from the paper to Emily's face. She was already turning away, her pulse thundering in her ears. She didn't look back. She couldn't. If she looked back, she might lose her nerve, might try to explain, might draw more attention than the silent warning already had. She walked to the kitchen, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. "You okay?" Marcus asked, noticing her pale face. "Yeah," Emily lied. "Just tired." Through the kitchen pass window, she could see Adrian Moretti studying the check. His companions were laughing about something, oblivious. But Adrian wasn't laughing. He was looking at the paper with an intensity that made Emily's stomach clench. Then, slowly, deliberately, he glanced toward the front windows, toward the street outside. One of his men said something, ready to stand. ready to leave. Adrian held up a hand, stopping him. "We're in no hurry," he said, his voice carrying across the quiet diner. "Let's have another coffee. Maybe dessert?" His companions looked surprised but settled back into their seats. One flagged Emily down. "Another round of coffee," he said. "And what's good here for dessert?" Emily's hands were shaking as she poured the coffee. "The apple pie is fresh," she managed. "And the chocolate cake." They ordered both, and Emily brought them out with mechanical precision. She avoided looking directly at Adrian, but she could feel his eyes on her, sharp, calculating, trying to piece together a puzzle she'd just handed him. Minutes ticked by. The rain continued its steady assault on the windows. Emily cleared table 5, wiped it down, tried to look busy. Inside she was screaming at herself. What had she done? Why had she gotten involved? This wasn't her fight. These weren't her people. Then, through the window, she saw movement. The 2 men across the street were shifting, checking their phones. One looked agitated. They'd been expecting Adrian and his companions to leave by now. The ambush, if that's what it was, had a timeline, and it was being disrupted. Adrian noticed too. Emily saw him exchange a brief glance with the man to his right. A subtle nod. The man casually pulled out his phone, sent a quick text. Within minutes, Emily noticed another car pull up down the street. Black, expensive, tinted windows. The men across the street hadn't noticed it yet. Adrian stood slowly, his movements unhurried. His companions followed his lead. They left cash on the table, far more than the check required, and walked toward the door. Emily's heart was in her throat. Had she just made things worse? Had she? Adrian paused at the door, his hand on the frame. He turned and his eyes found Emily's across the diner. For a moment, they just looked at each other. A waitress who'd risked everything to give a warning she didn't owe, and a man who understood the weight of that risk. He didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge her in any way that would draw attention, but Emily saw the recognition in his eyes, the understanding. Then he stepped out into the rain. Emily rushed to the window, her heart pounding. She watched as Adrian and his men walked to their car, parked directly in front of the diner. The 2 men across the street were moving now, hands reaching inside their jackets. But before they could act, the black car that had arrived moments earlier pulled up alongside them. Doors opened. More men emerged. Adrian's men, Emily realized. There was a tense moment where both groups faced each other across the wet street, rain pouring down between them. No shots fired, no sudden movements, just a silent standoff that spoke volumes about who had the upper hand. The 2 would-be attackers looked at each other, realized they'd lost the element of surprise, and quickly retreated into the darkness between buildings. Within seconds, they'd vanished. Adrian stood by his car, looking back at the diner. Even through the rain in the distance, Emily felt his gaze find her in the window. Then he got in his car and drove away. Emily stepped back from the window, her legs suddenly weak. She slumped against the counter, trying to catch her breath. Her entire body was trembling now, the adrenaline that had kept her moving finally crashing. "Emily?" Marcus was beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "What just happened?" "I don't know," Emily whispered, and it was partly true. She didn't know who those men were, why they'd wanted to hurt Adrian Moretti, or what chain of events she'd just set in motion. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her 3 years of invisibility had just ended. She'd saved the life of one of the most powerful men in New York's underworld, and he knew it. He knew her face, knew where she worked, knew she'd seen something she shouldn't have. Emily looked down at her hands, still shaking, and wondered if she'd just saved her own life or signed her own ending. The bell above the door chimed. Emily's head snapped up, her heart leaping into her throat. But it was just a young couple laughing and shaking rain from their coats, oblivious to everything that had just transpired. "Sit anywhere," Emily heard herself say, her voice sounding distant, mechanical. Marcus was watching her with concern. "You sure you're okay?" Emily nodded, though nothing felt okay. She grabbed a menu and approached the couple, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away footprints and evidence, leaving behind only questions and the certain knowledge that everything had changed. On the table where Adrian Moretti had sat, the cash he'd left remained. Emily would count it later and discover he'd left a $500 tip on a $60 check. But beneath the bills, weighted down and protected from view, was something else. A business card with no name, just a phone number written in clean, precise handwriting. Emily stared at it for a long moment, her mind racing through implications and consequences. She should throw it away. She should forget this night ever happened. She should go back to being invisible. Instead, she picked up the card and slipped it into her apron pocket. Because deep down in a place she didn't want to examine too closely, Emily knew this wasn't over. Whatever she'd started tonight by writing those numbers on a bill, it was only the beginning. The clock above the kitchen read 10:58 p.m. Closing time was 2 minutes away. But for Emily Rivers, the night and everything that would follow had only just begun. Emily didn't sleep that night. She lay in her small apartment in Queens, staring at the water-stained ceiling as shadows from passing headlights crawled across the plaster. The business card sat on her nightstand, a small rectangle of white paper that seemed to pulse with significance in the darkness. 3 times she'd reached for it, and 3 times she'd pulled her hand back. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflective under the yellow glow of streetlights. The sounds of the city filtered through her thin walls. Distant sirens, a car alarm, someone laughing on the street below. Normal sounds, safe sounds. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that everything had shifted beneath her feet. She kept replaying the moment in the diner, Adrian Moretti's eyes meeting hers across the room, that look of recognition and calculation. She'd spent 3 years building a life where she was nobody, where she could disappear into the background of coffee shops and city streets, and in one impulsive moment, she'd thrown it all away. When the first gray light of dawn crept through her window, Emily finally gave up on sleep. She showered, dressed in jeans and a sweater, and made coffee that she barely tasted. Her hands were steadier now, but the knot in her stomach remained. Her apartment was small but clean, a studio with barely enough room for a bed, a tiny kitchenette, and a table with 2 chairs she'd found on the street and refinished herself. The walls were bare except for a calendar and a single photograph in a simple frame. The photo showed a younger Emily, maybe 22, standing beside a tall young man with her same dark hair and warm smile. Her brother, Danny. Emily touched the frame gently, her throat tightening. "I'm sorry," she whispered like she did every morning. "I'm so sorry." Danny had been 24 when he'd gotten involved with the wrong people. He'd been trying to make fast money, convinced he could handle himself, certain he was smarter than the system. Emily had warned him. She'd begged him to walk away. But Danny had always been stubborn, always believed he could talk his way out of anything, until the night he couldn't. Emily had been there that night, not at the scene but close enough. She'd followed Danny, worried about a phone conversation she'd overheard. She'd watched from a distance as he'd met with men in expensive suits outside a warehouse in Philadelphia. She'd seen the argument, seen Danny try to walk away, seen him realize too late that walking away wasn't an option. She'd hidden in the shadows, her hand clamped over her mouth to keep from screaming, as they'd taken her brother from her. Afterward, when the police had asked questions she couldn't answer without putting herself in danger, she'd realized the truth. She'd seen faces. She could identify people. And in that world, being a witness was the same as signing your own ending. So Emily Rivers had ceased to exist. She'd become Emma Richardson, then Elise Randolph, and finally Emily Rivers again. The name felt safest because it was closest to her real one, easier to remember, harder to slip up on. She'd moved from Philadelphia to Baltimore, then to Boston, and finally to New York. She'd worked cash jobs, stayed off social media, never made close friends. She'd survived by being invisible, until last night. Emily poured her coffee down the sink. It had gone cold while she'd been lost in memory, and grabbed her jacket. She had the early shift at the diner today, starting at 7. Marcus would already be there, prepping for the breakfast rush. The morning air was crisp and clean after the rain. Emily walked the 6 blocks to the subway station, her eyes constantly scanning the street. It was an old habit, one she'd developed in those first terrifying months after Danny's passing. Check behind you. Note the faces. Remember the cars. Always know your exits. Today, those habits screamed warnings she couldn't quite identify. A man in a dark coat stood on the corner, drinking coffee. Was he watching her? Or was she being paranoid? A black car drove past slowly. Coincidence or something more? Emily's pulse quickened, and she forced herself to breathe normally, to keep walking at a steady pace. By the time she reached the diner, her nerves were frayed. She pushed through the door, the familiar bell chiming, and felt a small measure of relief at the sight of Marcus already behind the grill. "Morning," he called, glancing up. Then his expression shifted. "You look terrible. Did you sleep at all?" "Not really," Emily admitted, tying her apron. Just couldn't shut my brain off. Marcus flipped pancakes with practiced ease. Look, about last night, I don't want to talk about it, Emily said quickly. Emily, those guys, I said I don't want to talk about it. Marcus studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, but if you need anything, I know. Thank you. The breakfast rush started at 7:30 and didn't let up until almost 10. Emily threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction. Coffee cups, plates of eggs and bacon, the familiar rhythms of orders and service. She could almost convince herself that last night had been a strange dream, until she looked up and saw him. Adrian Moretti sat in the same corner booth wearing a different suit but carrying the same aura of controlled power. He was alone this time, reading a newspaper, a cup of coffee steaming on the table in front of him. Emily's heart stopped. Marcus saw him at the same moment. Oh no, he muttered. Emily, I see him, she said quietly. Her mouth had gone dry. I'll handle it. Maybe I should. Marcus, please, I'll handle it. She took a breath, grabbed the coffee pot, and walked to the booth. Her hands were shaking again, but she kept them steady through sheer force of will. Good morning, she said, her voice betraying only a slight tremor. Would you like a refill? Adrian looked up from his newspaper. In the morning light, she could see him more clearly. The sharp line of his jaw, the slight stubble he hadn't bothered to shave, the intelligence in those gray-blue eyes. He was younger than she'd thought, maybe mid-30s, and handsome in a way that was almost unsettling. Please, he said, sliding his cup toward her. And perhaps we could talk? Emily's hand froze mid-pour. I'm working. I can wait until your shift ends. That's not a good idea. Miss Rivers. He said her name with careful precision, and Emily felt the ground shift beneath her. He knew her name. Of course he knew her name. Men like Adrian Moretti didn't leave loose ends. We need to talk about last night. There's nothing to talk about, Emily said, finishing pouring his coffee. You ordered food. I served it. That's all. We both know that's not all. Emily set the coffee pot down on the table, her patience fraying. Around them, the diner buzzed with morning conversation. Oblivious, normal. She leaned in slightly, keeping her voice low. Look, I don't know who you are or what you do, and I don't want to know. I saw something. I made a choice. That's the end of it. Please, just let it be the end of it. Adrian regarded her silently for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. The men who were waiting outside last night, they weren't there by accident. They were there to make sure I didn't leave that diner alive. You prevented that, which means you saved my life, Miss Rivers, and I don't take that lightly. I don't want your gratitude. I'm not offering gratitude. I'm offering protection. Emily laughed. A short, bitter sound. Protection? From who? From you? From them. The people who wanted me gone. Because if they were watching me, they were watching the diner, which means they saw you give me that warning. The words hit Emily like ice water. She'd been so focused on the immediate danger on the moment that she hadn't thought about the aftermath, hadn't considered that someone might have been watching from a different angle, might have seen her write those numbers, might have understood what she'd done. You're trying to scare me, she said, but her voice wavered. I'm trying to tell you the truth. Adrian's expression was serious, almost gentle. You put yourself on their radar when you put yourself on mine, and these aren't people who forgive or forget. Emily's legs felt weak. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down without thinking. Why would they care about me? I'm nobody. You became somebody the moment you interfered. Adrian paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. In my world, Miss Rivers, loyalty is currency. You showed loyalty to someone you didn't know, for reasons I still don't understand. That makes you either very brave or very foolish. Either way, it makes you interesting. And interesting people attract attention. Emily's mind was racing. This couldn't be happening. She'd been so careful, so cautious. One moment of conscience, and everything was falling apart. What do you want from me? She asked finally. I want to understand why. Why did you warn me? Emily looked away, her jaw tight. How could she explain it? How could she tell him about Danny, about the guilt she carried? About the 3 years she'd spent wondering if things might have been different if someone had warned her brother. I heard someone on the phone, she said instead. Saw people waiting outside. It didn't seem right. That's all. That's not all. Most people would have looked the other way, would have convinced themselves it wasn't their problem. Adrian leaned forward slightly. But you didn't. Why? Does it matter? Yes. Because I need to know if I can trust you. Emily's eyes snapped back to his. Trust me. You don't even know me. Exactly. And yet you knew enough about me, or about men like me, to recognize danger when you saw it. You knew what that phone call meant. You knew what those men waiting outside were planning. Adrian's gaze was penetrating. How did you know, Miss Rivers? How does a waitress in Brooklyn understand the signs of an ambush? Emily's throat tightened. She'd said too much, revealed too much. I need to get back to work. She started to stand, but Adrian's next words stopped her. Your real name is Emily Brennan. You had a brother named Daniel. He passed away 3 years ago in Philadelphia, under circumstances that were never fully explained. You disappeared shortly after, moved several times, changed your name twice. You work cash jobs, stay off the grid, and you're very, very careful about not being noticed. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. She sank back into the chair, her heart hammering. How? I have resources, Adrian said simply. And when someone saves my life, I make it my business to understand why. So I'll ask you again, why did you warn me? Emily's hands were shaking in her lap. She clasped them together, trying to steady herself. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because no one warned my brother. Because I watched him walk into something he didn't understand and I couldn't stop it. Because I've spent 3 years wishing someone had done for Danny what I did for you last night. She looked up, meeting Adrian's eyes. Because I couldn't save him, but maybe I could save someone else, even if that someone else is a criminal, Adrian finished, a slight edge to his voice. Someone I don't understand, Emily corrected. Someone from a world I want nothing to do with. And yet here we are, Emily echoed bitterly. They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the diner swirling around them. Marcus was watching from the kitchen, worry evident on his face. The other customers were oblivious, absorbed in their breakfasts and conversations. I'm sorry about your brother, Adrian said finally. But running from the past doesn't change it, Miss Rivers. And whether you want to accept it or not, you're now part of something larger. The people who wanted me gone, they're connected to something your brother was involved in. The same network, the same operation. Emily's head snapped up. What are you talking about? Victor Castellano. Does that name mean anything to you? It did. Emily felt her stomach clench with recognition. Danny had mentioned that name once in a phone conversation she'd overheard weeks before his passing. He'd sounded nervous when he said it, almost frightened. I see it does, Adrian observed. Castellano runs most of the operations in the Philadelphia to New York corridor. 3 years ago, he was consolidating power, eliminating competition and loose ends. Your brother was working for one of Castellano's rivals, probably without fully understanding the stakes. When that rival disappeared, everyone connected to him became a liability. Stop, Emily whispered. Please stop. You need to hear this. Castellano has been looking for you. Not actively. You've done a good job staying hidden. But when his people saw you with me last night, they made the connection. Emily Brennan, the sister who witnessed something she shouldn't have. The one loose end they never tied up. Emily felt like she was drowning. The room seemed to spin around her. You're saying they're coming for me because I helped you? I'm saying they were always going to come for you eventually. Last night just moved up their timeline. Adrian's voice softened. But it also gave you something you didn't have before. An ally. I don't want your help, Emily said. But there was no conviction in her voice. I know. But you need it. And whether you believe it or not, I need yours too. Emily looked at him in disbelief. How could I possibly help you? You've seen Castellano's people. You recognized the setup last night, understood the signs. You have instincts that most people don't have. Instincts born from loss and survival. Adrian paused. And if Castellano is coming after both of us, we're stronger together than apart. This is insane, Emily said, standing up. Her legs were unsteady, but she forced herself to remain upright. You're asking me to, what? Join forces with you? Get deeper into this world instead of trying to escape it? I'm asking you to face reality. Running hasn't worked. Hiding hasn't worked. The past caught up to you anyway, just like it always does. Adrian stood as well, his presence commanding even in the mundane setting of a breakfast diner. But if you stand and fight, if you help me end Castellano's operation, you might actually get the freedom you've been looking for. Or I might end up like my brother. You might, Adrian acknowledged. But at least you'll have a chance. At least you'll have someone watching your back. Emily shook her head, tears threatening to spill. I can't do this. I can't. Your apartment building has been under surveillance since 5 this morning, Adrian said quietly. 2 men in a gray sedan parked across the street. They followed you to the subway station. My people intervened, redirected them, but they'll be back. Castellano knows where you live, Miss Rivers. He knows where you work. He knows your routine. The tears came then, hot and angry. Emily wiped them away roughly. Why are you doing this? Why do you care? Adrian reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. He placed it on the table between them. It showed a young woman, maybe 19, with long dark hair and a bright smile. She was standing in front of a university building holding books. My sister, Isabella, Adrian said. She was studying pre-med. She wanted to be a doctor, help people. 7 years ago, she witnessed something she shouldn't have. A meeting, an exchange. She didn't even fully understand what she'd seen, but it didn't matter. Castellano's people found her anyway. Emily looked at the photograph, then at Adrian. His expression was carefully controlled, but she could see the pain beneath it. She tried to run, Adrian continued. Tried to hide just like you did. She made it 3 months before they found her. By the time I got there, he paused, his jaw tightening. I was too late. I had the power, the resources, the connections, but I was too late to save her. I'm sorry, Emily whispered. So am I. Every single day. Adrian picked up the photograph, looked at it for a moment, then tucked it back into his jacket. You reminded me of her last night. Not in appearance, but in courage. Isabella would have done exactly what you did. Warned a stranger, risked herself to save someone else. It's why I had you investigated. Why I need to know you're safe. Emily's resistance was crumbling. She understood now. Adrian wasn't just offering protection out of obligation or strategy. He was trying to save her the way he couldn't save his sister. What if I say yes? She asked. What happens then? Then we work together to bring down Castellano's operation. We use their interest in you as bait, draw them out, gather evidence. We end this so that neither of us has to look over our shoulders anymore. You make it sound simple. It won't be. It'll be dangerous, complicated, and there's no guarantee of success. But it's a chance, Miss Rivers. It's more than running will give you. Emily looked around the diner, at Marcus watching from the kitchen, at the customers eating their breakfasts, at the ordinary world she'd been trying so desperately to remain part of. Then she looked back at Adrian Moretti, at this man from a world she'd sworn to avoid, offering her a way forward instead of another escape. I need time to think, she said finally. You have until tonight. My people will keep watch on your apartment. Make sure Castellano's men don't get too close. But by tonight, you need to decide. Run again, and hope you make it longer than 3 months, or stand and fight with someone who understands what you're up against. Adrian pulled out his wallet and left money on the table. Again, far more than the coffee cost. He started toward the door, then paused. My sister's name was Isabella, he said without turning around. But her friends called her Izzy. She used to say that running from problems just meant they'd catch you when you were too tired to fight back. I didn't understand what she meant until it was too late. He walked out into the bright morning, leaving Emily standing beside the booth, her mind churning with impossible choices. Marcus appeared at her elbow. Emily, what just happened? I don't know, she said honestly. I really don't know. But that wasn't entirely true. She did know. She knew that her 3 years of running had just come to an end. She knew that the past she'd been fleeing had finally caught up, and she knew that for the first time since Danny's passing, someone was offering her a chance to fight back instead of hide. The question was whether she had the courage to take it. Emily looked down at the money Adrian had left, and saw something else beneath the bills. A key card with an address written on it. A safe house, she realized. A place to go if she decided to accept his offer. She picked up the card, turned it over in her fingers. Then, before she could talk herself out of it, she slipped it into her apron pocket next to the business card from the night before. I need to take a break, she told Marcus. Emily, just 15 minutes, please. She walked out the back door into the alley behind the diner, breathing in the cool morning air. The sun was fully up now, warming the city, burning off the last traces of rain. It was going to be a beautiful day. Emily pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in 3 years. It rang 4 times before someone answered. Philadelphia Police Department, Detective Morrison speaking. Detective, Emily said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. This is Emily Brennan. I have information about the Victor Castellano organization, and I'm ready to talk. There was a long pause on the other end. Miss Brennan, we've been looking for you for... I know, I'm sorry, but I'm ready now. I have names, faces, details about an operation that's about to happen. But I need protection. Real protection. We can arrange that. Where are you? Emily looked at the key card in her hand, at the address written there. She thought about Adrian Moretti, about his sister Isabella, about her brother Danny. She thought about 3 years of running and how tired she was of looking over her shoulder. I'll call you back with details, she said. But detective, this is going to be bigger than just me. I'm going to need you to trust me, even when it doesn't make sense. Miss Brennan, 24 hours. I'll have everything you need in 24 hours. She ended the call before he could respond, her hands shaking but her mind clear. She wasn't going to run anymore. She wasn't going to hide. But she also wasn't going to blindly trust Adrian Moretti, no matter how sympathetic his story. She was going to do this her way, careful, strategic, with backup plans in place. Emily Rivers walked back into the diner, tied her apron, and returned to work. But inside, everything had changed. She wasn't a scared girl hiding from her past anymore. She was someone who was about to take her life back, and nothing, not Castellano, not Adrian, not anyone, was going to stop her. The safe house was nothing like Emily expected. She'd imagined something dark and industrial, a warehouse maybe, or a basement somewhere in the forgotten corners of Brooklyn. Instead, Adrian had sent a car to pick her up after her shift, and it had driven her across the Verrazano Bridge to a quiet residential street in Staten Island. The house was a modest 2-story colonial with a well-kept lawn and flower boxes in the windows. It looked like somewhere a family might live, not a hiding place for someone running from dangerous people. "This is it?" Emily asked as the driver opened her door. "Mr. Moretti believes the best hiding places are the ones that don't look like hiding places," the driver said. His name was Thomas and he'd been polite but professional during the drive. "You'll be safe here." Emily grabbed her backpack, hastily packed with clothes, toiletries, and the few things she couldn't leave behind, and followed Thomas to the front door. He unlocked it with a key code and stepped inside, gesturing for her to follow. The interior was surprisingly comfortable. Hardwood floors, cream-colored walls, furniture that looked lived in but well-maintained. A kitchen with granite counters opened into a living room with large windows overlooking a small backyard. Upstairs, Thomas showed her 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. "Everything you need should be here," Thomas said. "Food in the kitchen, fresh linens in the closet. Mr. Moretti will arrive within the hour." "He's coming here?" Emily's stomach tightened. "You'll need to coordinate, figure out the next steps." Thomas handed her a cell phone. "New. Prepaid. This is secure. Mr. Moretti's number is programmed in. Don't use your personal phone while you're here." After Thomas left, Emily stood in the middle of the living room feeling displaced. 24 hours ago, she'd been serving coffee and counting tips. Now she was in a safe house, waiting to strategize with a man whose world she didn't understand, about an enemy she'd been running from for 3 years. She thought about the call she'd made to Detective Morrison. She hadn't told Adrian about it. Wasn't sure if she should. Could she trust the police to protect her? Could she trust Adrian? Could she trust anyone? Emily was unpacking her backpack in the upstairs bedroom when she heard the front door open. Her heart jumped, but she forced herself to stay calm. She walked to the top of the stairs and looked down. Adrian stood in the entryway, removing his jacket. He looked different in casual clothes, dark jeans and a navy sweater that made his eyes look even more striking, less intimidating, more human. "Miss Rivers," he said, looking up, "I hope the accommodations are acceptable." "It's fine," Emily said, descending the stairs. "Better than I expected, actually." "Good. We need to talk strategy." They sat at the kitchen table, and Adrian spread out several documents, photos, names, addresses. Emily recognized some of the faces from 3 years ago, though she'd never known their names. "This is Castellano's network," Adrian explained. "He has operations throughout the East Coast, but his base is in Philadelphia. The people who were waiting for me outside the diner work for his lieutenant, Marco Santos." Emily's breath caught. "I know that name. Danny mentioned him. Your brother was working low-level jobs for Santos, probably without understanding the full scope of what he was involved in. When Santos's previous boss was eliminated by Castellano, everyone connected became a risk. Your brother was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and now I am too," Emily said quietly. "Now you have information they want erased," Adrian corrected. "But that also makes you valuable. You can identify people, testify to activities. That's leverage." "Leverage for what?" "For bringing down Castellano's operation. I've been working toward this for years, gathering evidence, building cases, working with federal investigators. But Castellano is careful. He insulates himself with layers of people who take the fall for him. To truly end this, we need someone who can connect the dots from the inside. Emily shook her head. I'm not from the inside. I'm just someone who saw too much. You saw the right things. And more importantly, they know you saw. If we can draw them out, make them move against you, we can catch them in the act. With proper surveillance, protection, and coordination with law enforcement. I already called the police. Emily interrupted. Adrian went very still. What? Detective Morrison in Philadelphia. I called him this morning. I told him I was ready to provide information about Castellano. For a moment, Adrian said nothing. His expression was unreadable. Then slowly, he leaned back in his chair. That was dangerous. So is trusting you, Emily shot back. I don't know you, Mr. Moretti. For all I know, this could be an elaborate setup, at least with the police. The police have been trying to nail Castellano for a decade with no success. He has people in law enforcement, Emily. People who report back to him. You calling a detective in Philadelphia might have just told Castellano exactly where to find you. Emily's stomach dropped. She hadn't thought of that. Had been so focused on creating backup that she'd potentially exposed herself further. Morrison is clean, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Maybe, or maybe he's one of the people on Castellano's payroll, or maybe he's honest but talks to someone who isn't. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. This is why I wanted to coordinate, this is why planning matters. I don't need your permission to protect myself, Emily said, anger flaring. I've been doing it for 3 years without your help. And how's that been working out? You're in a safe house because they found you anyway. Because you saved my life and put yourself on their radar. You don't get to be self-righteous about this, Emily. We're in it together now, whether you like it or not. They glared at each other across the table, tension crackling between them. Then Emily's phone, the secure one Thomas had given her, buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We need to meet. Tomorrow noon, Washington Square Park. Come alone. Emily showed it to Adrian. His jaw tightened. That was fast, he muttered. Morrison? I don't know. The number isn't his. It's a trap. Or it's someone who wants to help. Emily. I'm going. Her voice was firm. If it's Morrison, I need to hear what he has to say. If it's Castellano's people, then we know they're moving. Either way, we get information. You'll be exposed. Vulnerable. That's the point, isn't it? You said we need to draw them out. Consider this drawing them out. Adrian studied her for a long moment. You're not going alone. The message said, I don't care what the message said. You go, but my people will be there. At a distance, watching, ready to intervene if things go wrong. Emily wanted to argue but recognized the wisdom in his approach. Fine, but they stay back. If this is a legitimate contact, I don't want to scare them off. Agreed. Adrian pulled out his own phone and made several calls, speaking in low, clipped tones. Setting up surveillance, Emily realized. Positioning people, creating a safety net. When he finished, the tension between them had eased slightly. Adrian looked tired suddenly, the weight of whatever burden he carried showing in the lines around his eyes. Why are you really doing this? Emily asked quietly. And don't tell me it's just about your sister. There's something more. Adrian was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd heard it before. Castellano took everything from me. My sister, yes. But before that, my father. He was trying to legitimize our family's business. Get out of the darker aspects. Castellano saw that as weakness, as betrayal. He orchestrated events that led to my father's downfall. Then he went after Isabella to send a message. I'm sorry, Emily said. I don't want your sympathy. I want justice. I want Castellano to face consequences for the lives he's destroyed. And I want to make sure no one else loses someone the way I did, the way you did. Emily felt something shift inside her, a recognition of shared pain, shared purpose. We're going to do this, aren't we? Actually go up against him. We are, Adrian confirmed, but we do it smart, carefully. We don't take unnecessary risks, says the man who probably takes risks every day. A ghost of a smile crossed Adrian's face. That's different. Those are calculated risks. This is personal. Personal makes you careless if you're not careful. They spent the next hour planning, contingencies, signals, escape routes. Adrian's attention to detail was impressive, almost obsessive. He thought through scenarios Emily hadn't even considered, prepared for possibilities that seemed far-fetched but weren't impossible. As evening fell, Adrian ordered food, Chinese takeout that Thomas picked up from a restaurant across town, making sure it couldn't be traced back to their location. They ate in the kitchen, the conversation shifting to safer topics. Emily learned that Adrian had studied business at Columbia, that he appreciated jazz music and old movies, that he'd traveled extensively through Europe. "You're not what I expected," Emily admitted. "What did you expect? Someone harder, I guess. More intimidating. I can be both those things when necessary, but I'm also just a person, Emily. Someone trying to navigate complicated circumstances and doing the best I can." It was the most human thing he'd said, and it made Emily see him differently, not as a figure from a dangerous world, but as someone who'd been shaped by loss and responsibility, just like her. Later, as they prepared for the night, Adrian would stay in the second bedroom to ensure Emily's safety. She found herself standing at the top of the stairs, hesitant. "Adrian," she called down. He appeared at the bottom, looking up. "Yes? Thank you. For this. For trying to keep me safe even though I haven't made it easy. You don't need to thank me. This is what we do now. We protect each other." Emily nodded and retreated to her room, but sleep didn't come easily. She lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the house settling, thinking about tomorrow's meeting in Washington Square Park, thinking about Detective Morrison, about Castellano, about the chess game she'd been pulled into. Somewhere in the house she heard Adrian moving around, checking locks probably or making final preparations for tomorrow. It should have made her nervous having him so close. Instead, it made her feel safer than she had in 3 years. Maybe that was foolish. Maybe she was trusting too quickly, letting down guards she'd worked hard to build. Or maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found someone who understood what it meant to fight back against the darkness that had taken so much from both of them. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tomorrow they would know if her call to Morrison had been wise or disastrous. Tomorrow the game would begin in earnest. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Emily Rivers fell asleep without nightmares. And in the room down the hall, Adrian Moretti sat in the darkness looking at a photograph of his sister and making promises to the memory of someone he'd failed to save, that he wouldn't fail again. Washington Square Park was crowded at noon on a Friday. Emily sat on a bench near the fountain, watching students from NYU hurry past with coffee cups and backpacks, tourists taking photos of the arch, street performers setting up their acts. The autumn sun was warm and the park felt alive with energy. Normal, safe, ordinary. But Emily's heart was racing. She wore jeans, a dark jacket, and sunglasses Adrian had insisted on. "Makes it harder for anyone to get a clear photograph of you," he'd explained that morning. Her hands were folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. Adrian's people were somewhere in the crowd. She didn't know where exactly, which was the point. They were ghosts, watching, waiting. Adrian himself was in a car 2 blocks away, monitoring everything through communication devices his team wore. Emily checked her phone. 12:03 p.m. Whoever had sent the message was late. Then she saw him. Detective Morrison looked older than she remembered, more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes. He wore casual clothes, jeans and a jacket, trying to blend in. But Emily recognized the cautious way he scanned the park, the professional assessment of threats and exits. He sat down beside her without preamble. "Miss Brennan, it's been a long time." "Detective?" Emily's voice was steady despite her nerves. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you'd actually show." Morrison studied her face. "You look different, older, tired. 3 years of running will do that. You could have come in any time. We would have protected you." "Could you have?" Emily challenged. "Really? Because my brother trusted the system and look where that got him." Morrison's expression tightened. "Your brother made choices that put him in harm's way. We tried to help him, but he wouldn't cooperate. He was scared. He didn't know who to trust. And you do now? That's why you called?" Morrison leaned back, his posture deceptively relaxed. "What's changed, Emily? Why reach out after all this time?" Emily took a breath. "Because they found me anyway. Because running didn't work. And because I have information that could help bring down Castellano's operation." "What kind of information?" "Names, faces, details about operations from 3 years ago that might still be relevant, and current information about people who are actively working for Castellano." Morrison's eyes sharpened with interest. "Current information? How would you have that?" This was the delicate part. Emily had rehearsed it with Adrian, but actually saying the words felt dangerous. "I've made contact with someone else who's working against Castellano. Someone with resources and connections." "Who?" "I can't tell you that yet. Not until I know I can trust you. Morrison's jaw tightened. Emily, if you're involved with someone from that world, you're putting yourself in more danger, not less. These people are trying to survive just like me, and they have a better track record of protecting their own than the police do. That's not fair. Maybe not. But it's true. Emily softened her tone. Look, detective, I want to help. I want Castellano to face consequences for what he's done, but I need guarantees. Real protection, not witness protection where I disappear and hope they never find me. I need this to end. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, watching the crowds move past. What you're talking about, actively going after Castellano rather than just hiding from him, that's incredibly risky. Even with protection, there's no guarantee of success. I know, but I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of looking over my shoulder, changing my name, losing years of my life to fear. If I'm going to be in danger anyway, I'd rather face it head on. Brave words. But bravery gets people hurt when it's not backed by proper planning. Morrison turned to face her fully. If I bring you in, if I offer official protection, you need to tell me everything, including who you've been working with. I need 24 hours to coordinate with my contact to make sure we're all on the same page. Then I'll give you everything. Emily, 24 hours, detective. That's not negotiable. Morrison studied her face, then nodded slowly. All right, 24 hours. But if I sense for 1 second that you're playing games, that you're being manipulated by someone with their own agenda, I'm not. I promise. Morrison stood, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a different phone, not his service phone, Emily noticed. This number reaches me directly, secure line. When you're ready to talk, call me on this. Don't use your regular phone. Emily took the number, memorizing it. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We haven't accomplished anything. Morrison looked around the park one more time. Be careful, Emily. The fact that they found you after 3 years means they have resources and patience. Those are dangerous combinations. He walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Emily sat for a few more minutes, letting her heart rate settle, making sure no one was watching her with unusual interest. Then she stood and walked toward the park's east exit, following the route she and Adrian had planned. She was 2 blocks away when a car pulled up beside her. Adrian's car. The door opened, and she slid inside. How did it go? Adrian asked immediately. He wants everything in 24 hours. Names, connections, all of it, including information about you. Adrian nodded as if he'd expected this. And you told him? I told him I needed to coordinate with my contact first. Bought us time. Good. Adrian pulled into traffic, his eyes constantly checking mirrors. My people didn't spot any obvious surveillance, but that doesn't mean it wasn't there. Castellano's people are professionals. So what do we do now? Now, we make the final preparations. Morrison is clean. I had him checked out years ago. He's one of the few honest cops still working these cases. If we bring him in fully, give him what he needs, he can coordinate with federal prosecutors, build a case that will actually stick. And what happens to you? Emily asked. You're not exactly on the right side of the law either. Adrian's smile was thin. I've made arrangements. Immunity for testimony, protection for cooperating. I've been planning my exit from this life for years, Emily. Your situation just accelerated the timeline. Emily studied his profile as he drove. You're really going to walk away? Just like that? It's never just like that. There will be consequences, obligations, people who feel betrayed. But yes, I'm walking away. My father wanted legitimacy. My sister wanted me to have a normal life. It's time I honored those wishes. They drove in silence for a while, navigating through Manhattan traffic. Emily watched the city pass by. The buildings, the people, the endless motion of urban life. Somewhere out there, Castellano's people were planning, strategizing, trying to eliminate the threats Emily and Adrian represented. I'm scared, Emily admitted quietly. Good. Fear keeps you alert. It's when you stop being scared that you make mistakes. Adrian glanced at her. But you're not alone in this. Remember that. They returned to the safe house, where Adrian's team had gathered. Thomas and 3 others Emily hadn't met before. They were professional, efficient, spreading documents and equipment across the dining room table. We have confirmation that Castellano knows about the meeting in the park, Thomas reported. He has people trying to identify who Morrison met with, but they lost track when Emily left the area. Good. Adrian turned to Emily. For the next 24 hours, you stay here. No going outside, no contact with anyone except this team and Morrison. We're going to compile everything we have. Names, dates, transactions, connections. Build an airtight case. Emily nodded and joined them at the table. For hours they worked, Emily providing details about what she'd witnessed 3 years ago, Adrian and his team filling in the larger picture with their own intelligence. Slowly, a comprehensive picture emerged. Castellanos' network, his operations, his vulnerabilities. As evening fell, Adrian ordered everyone except Emily to leave. Get some rest, he told his team. Tomorrow is going to be intense. After they left, the house felt quiet, almost peaceful. Emily sat at the kitchen table, exhausted but wired. Adrian made coffee. Real coffee, not the cheap diner kind Emily was used to. Thank you, she said as he handed her a mug. For all of this, for taking me seriously. You saved my life, Emily. This is the least I can do. Adrian sat across from her. But beyond that, you remind me that there are still people worth fighting for. People who do the right thing even when it costs them. I don't feel heroic. I feel terrified most of the time. Heroism isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. They talked late into the night, about Danny and Isabella, about choices and consequences, about the lives they'd both lived in the shadows. Emily found herself opening up in ways she hadn't with anyone in years, and Adrian matched her vulnerability with his own stories of loss and regret. What will you do after? Emily asked finally. When this is over and you've walked away? I don't know. I've spent so long focused on revenge and justice that I haven't thought much about what comes after. Adrian smiled slightly. Maybe something boring. Business school was interesting. Perhaps I'll go back to that world, do something legitimate. That would be quite a change. The best kind. He looked at her directly. What about you? What does Emily Rivers want when she's not running or hiding? Emily considered the question. I want to wake up without fear. I want to use my real name. I want to call old friends and visit my parents' graves without worrying about who might be watching. She paused. I want a normal life, whatever that means. You'll have it. After tomorrow, after we hand everything to Morrison, you'll finally be free. Emily wanted to believe him, but some part of her, the part that had learned to be cautious, to expect the worst, remained guarded. The next morning, they met Morrison at a federal building in Lower Manhattan. He'd brought 2 federal prosecutors and an FBI agent specializing in organized operations. For 3 hours, Emily and Adrian laid out everything. Documents, testimony, connections. Morrison listened intently, occasionally asking questions but mostly letting them present their case. The prosecutors took notes, exchanged meaningful glances, clearly recognizing the value of what they were hearing. This is substantial, one of the prosecutors said finally. With this information, we can get warrants, start making cases against multiple levels of Castellanos' organization. How long until you move? Adrian asked. 48 hours, maybe less. We'll need to coordinate with multiple jurisdictions, but we can move fast when necessary. And protection for Emily? Full protection. Safe location, security detail, everything she needs until trials are complete. Emily felt relief wash over her, mixed with residual anxiety. And after trials? After trials, you're free. New identity if you want it, or you can reclaim your life as Emily Brennan. That choice is yours. As they were leaving the building, Emily felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of secrets, of fear, of constant vigilance, it was lifting. Not gone completely, but lessening. Adrian walked her to the car where his team waited. You did it, he said. You faced your fear and won. We did it, Emily corrected. I couldn't have done this without you. They stood facing each other on the busy street, and Emily realized how much had changed in just a few days. This man who'd been a stranger, a figure from a world she didn't understand, had become something else. An ally, a protector, maybe even a friend. What happens now? She asked. Now Morrison and his team do their work. Castellano and his people will be brought in, charged, tried, and we, Adrian trailed off. We go back to our separate lives. Emily finished quietly. Maybe. Or maybe we stay in touch. Make sure the other is doing okay. Adrian's expression was softer than she'd seen it. I'd like that if you would. Emily smiled. A real smile. The kind she hadn't felt capable of in years. I'd like that too. 3 weeks later, Emily stood in Washington Square Park again. But this time there was no fear, no looking over her shoulder. Castellano had been arrested along with 37 members of his organization. The case was solid. The evidence overwhelming. Detective Morrison had called that morning with the news. You're free, Emily. Really, truly free. She'd cried then, tears of relief, of grief for the years lost, of hope for the future ahead. Now, standing in the autumn sunshine, Emily felt something she hadn't felt since before Danny's passing. Peace. Her phone buzzed. A text from Adrian. Coffee? Emily smiled and typed back. The Blue Anchor. I know a good place. Perfect. See you in 20. Emily started walking, not running, not hiding, just walking through the city like any other person living their life. She thought about Danny, about how he'd want her to be happy, to move forward. She thought about the waitress who'd written a warning on a bill and the chain of events it had started. Sometimes saving someone else meant saving yourself. Sometimes the bravest thing you could do was ask for help, and sometimes the most unlikely alliances became the foundations of new beginnings. Emily Rivers was finally home.